Well, I come from a family of 8. We were brought up in a tenement in the south side of Glasgow, and my father, my great grandfather was a pipe major. My grandfather had the interest in music to put his children to music, so my father was put to violin. But then something, well, not very serious came along, but also exciting. It was World War II, and he joined the RAF. So violin was shut in its case, and that was sort of history. So through my father, through his interest in music, all of us, all 8 of us, went to music classes. But only 3 of us. 3 of us became professional musicians. The rest of my family went into other professions, totally different. But three of us. Maureen was a very distinguished violinist. She's retired now. She was for many years principal second of the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. And Pauline, God rest her soul, but she was more or less a freelance musician. She was with the BBC Northern for a long time, but she freelanced in Scotland as well. So there's 3 of us, and 2 sisters. And when my sister was in the Welsh Orchestra, conductors would say, Are you, to Maureen, are you John Doig's sister? And then conductor would say to me, are you Maureen Doig's brother? So we used to get all this until conductors sort of knew you better as you went on in the profession. They would then just say, I've got a message from your sister. So they used to sort of, but when I started when I was 5, there's a very distinguished teacher, Elsa Omer, who taught a lot of people on the south side of Glasgow at the age of 5. So I then went to the academy. Elsa became very ill, and so I then went to Thursday Weisel and then to Roger Raphael as a junior student. And after a few years, he came in one day and he said, I've got a surprise for you. And I said, what's that? So I was about 13 years of age. And he said, I'm going to take you to play to Yehudi Menuhin. And I thought, oh my goodness. So I ran home to tell my parents, I'm going to play for Yehudi Menuhin. And they even went into I couldn't believe it. I mean, I suppose youngsters today, it's like, you know, a pop star or something. I would look at records and say, Yehudi Menuhin, I'm going to meet him. So he took me to the Central Hotel in Glasgow, and Menuhin was doing a concert there. I think it was that night with this festival orchestra in the City Hall. So I played some unaccompanied Bach and this, that and the other. By the way, I didn't know why. I was playing for him. I was just very excited as I was. So anyway, so he said to me, I did the audition, Central Hotel, and it was all very exciting. And he said to me, are you coming to the concert tonight? And I said, no, because I didn't know there was a concert. So I said, no. And Roger said, well, I'll see if we can get tickets and all the rest of it. So there was Menuhin's manager was there, and he was going, and Menuhin said, no, he said, it's sold out. So Menuhin said, he'll get in. So they arranged for me on the night to meet this manager at the stage door. And at City Hall, they brought a chair upstairs next to one of the rows, a special chair for me to sit on to watch Menuhin play with the Menuhin Festival Orchestra. So that was very exciting. And then I met him afterwards and all that. So all this, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why that was going on. So then the next thing that happened to do with Menuhin was I was going down to Stoke Dabernon for the Menuhin school. So my sister Maureen, she was student at the Royal College at the time, and so I got the train down, met her there. A friend drove us down to Surrey to the Menuhin School, and we looked around, and that was very exciting. So I thought that was it. I was going to this school, and I met some of the players, or the musicians, young musicians. I thought, this is going to be wonderful, it's going to be wonderful. And then, of course, the powers that be, the grown-ups, whatever they were deciding, I mean, never told me though, never told me, but I sort of heard that, no, I wasn't going there after all. I'm going to a new school in Edinburgh. And I thought, what? So of course, being that sort of age, I thought, because when you're young like that, you think you've done something wrong, or was I not good enough, or was I, you know, no one really told me, but anyway, so I was to go to this school. I didn't know much more about it than that, so I remember arriving with my sister at Haymarket Station, and she walked me around to Palmerston Place and left me there, and then I walked to Old Coates House, and I think it was Dennis met me, and we went up the stair and went in, and there was a headmaster's study there, 2 rooms, one to the left, one to the right. The young ones were in the right-hand side, and the older boys were in the left. And I was taken in here, and there'd be, what, 10 dozen boys or something, all sort of looking. And of course, I'd had the uniform by then. And I came in, and they said, "This is John, he's the first instrumentalist. We were telling you all about what was happening, the boys were going there." So I sat here, and I sort of looked around, and I thought, I mean, I think back now, I mean, I came from a Glasgow Comprehensive of 500, 600 pupils to this school, like Tom Brown's school days or something. And you called, Miss Crave was there, you called her Ma'am, and old Dr. Stiles, who was headmaster, he was a wonderful man actually. Old Dr. Stiles, you know, who you called Doctor, and this. So there I was, and I was there for a couple of weeks. There was a break after that, and I think the choir went to Germany for I remember them going off somewhere for a week. So but I was just going in a day, you know, back to Glasgow every day. So then after about a week, I went back again, and then we were going to stay in Portobello. But I was there again on my own with the boys, and they were. But it was very strange for me to say no. I didn't like it again. Of course I didn't like it, because I thought I was going to all these violinists down in Surrey, so I was sitting, you know. But boys will be boys at the playground once you get into football and all this sort of, you know, and eventually they accept you. Children do. So I would say about 6 weeks after that, the next one arrived, second pupil, who I think was a cellist. But then I was thinking about this recently. When you think back to then though, that was a huge thing as well, because she was a girl. Well, there hadn't been any girls in that school whatsoever. So that was a huge thing, a huge thing. And then about 2 weeks after that, two other violinists came. And that was, so there were 4 of us till the end of that sort of session, that term, that year. But we did, really for us as instrumentalists, there was a great big gala concert. The Provost Crossfield, Dennis Townhill and Lady Polwarth. Well, Lady Polwarth would have these connections. It was Holyrood Palace in the State Room. There was no royalty there, but she always had connections, but it was a fundraising, so there was important people there, and you know, just as children, you know, it's all, you know, this glitter and gold, and you know, and people in their finery, and so there was lots of speeches, and we all sat with Menuhin. Menuhin, I think Menuhin played, I can't really remember, we played. I mean, I remember we all played a sonata or something. I'm sure Menuhin played, I might be wrong, I'm not sure. But anyway, Menuhin was obviously afterwards going around meeting people, and we were meeting people. But of course, I hadn't an idea what this was about. I mean, so we just sat in awe. But I remember sitting with Menuhin, and the next one we got up and play, and there was great rounds of applause. And the reason I mentioned Holyrood Palace is because that was really the beginning for me at St Mary's. And it sort of ends later on. I'll tell you why this is important, you know, later on. Holyrood Palace to me is very important. So there's four of us, and before the end of the year, we decided, the four of us, to have a Christmas concert. Just, we decided. So we got the music for the Christmas concerto, Corelli. So the 3 violins and a cello, etc. And we started rehearsing this, and I said, well, I'll play something, and you play this, and you play that, and that, right, we'll do that. So we asked our parents, and parents were asking if we were going to open the chapter house. So it was about 6 weeks before, so I happened to mention this to Dennis Townhill. And I said, our Christmas concert. And Dennis says, what Christmas concert? And I said, oh, we've arranged one for our parents at chapter house. Who arranged it? And I said, and of course I think back now, I thought, God almighty, you know, but anyway, I must admit, they went along with it. Dennis, they took it over and sort of made sure this was done properly. They said, right, who's playing what? And John Taylor was the assistant organist there. He accompanied our sonatas and everything. So it was done properly. So on the night, and we played our Christmas concerto, and John played the continuo and everything, and that was all very nice. And then after that, once we got into the next year, there were more started to, you know, instrumentalists, I mean, started to come. And but it was very slow. I mean, everything was very slow. I mean, we would have one lesson a week. You know, the teacher would come, Roger would come from the academy. We'd all go off to practice rooms like the song school or the Walpole Hall, anywhere at all. And so there was no real playing together. We just did that for Christmas, but it was all students from the academy would come over to supervise our practice, you know, maybe once a week. But that was really all that sort of happened then. We stayed in Portobello, and then 3 of us moved to stay with the Townhills, Dennis and his wife Mabel. And Dennis, they would obviously sing evensong every evening. And we were meant to go off and practice because Dennis would drive us obviously home after evensong, so in that period we should be good off practicing. But now and again I would sneak into the cathedral and listen to this evensong. And it's amazing what I remember, really. I mean, you've got to remember, I was brought up Roman Catholic. And when I went home every weekend, we stayed in Portobello, at Dennis's rather, later on during the week, but I always went home at the weekend. So I would play the organ and I was an altar boy at our local Catholic church, so to hear this music was totally different, the anthems and things. And I can even hear it now. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. And there'll be hundreds of choir boys saying, not again, not again, not again. So, I enjoyed it. I used to go in there quite a lot. But then a new boarding house opened in Lindach Place, I think, the sort of following year. I stayed with Dennis, but they started moving there, I would say in my second, going into my third year. So there were more and more pupils coming. The balance was still more choristers, I would say, and maybe about 10 instrumentalists by that time. But I remember, but you were expected just to get on with it. I mean, I remember having a piano lesson with Dennis, and Dennis was always rushing here, there and everywhere, because he did everything. He was a marvellous musician, I mean, and administrator. But he did everything, Dennis, and he had to do the choir and take the song school rehearsals. We also taught at the academy, and I remember going into him on my last year there, at the piano lesson, and he was always looking at his watch because he caught this train from Haymarket, and he said, I happened to say to him at the end of the lesson, I said, oh, by the way, I was a member of the National Youth Orchestra since I was 12 or 13. I said, I've been made leader of the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. And Dennis said, oh, have you? Oh, bravo, well done. Well, listen, I'm going to have to run for the train. So, I mean, I'll see you back at the saucer and I'll go off now and you have to do your practice. Who are you with today? Right, off you go and do it. And that was it. I mean, there was no newsletters then, there was no internet. There was just, no one, he told no one. No one knew. So it was just sort of expected. Well, the academic side, Miss Gray, Ishmael Gray taught English, and Dr. Stiles, I think it was maths and arithmetic. But we did have Mr. Godin, I remember, I think for mathematics. He was a marvellous man. Mrs. Rees for science. Provost Crossfield's wife or friend, I remember. Yeah, so I mean, the academic sort of normal days lessons took up more time, obviously, than the practice, because practice would maybe just be an hour a day. I mean, supervised, I mean, you practice in the evening as well, but the academic side was just the same as the choristers, exactly the same as the choristers, yeah. Yeah. We didn't have any ensemble playing there. You know, there weren't enough pupils. You know, but what we did do, Dennis would stage Handel's Messiah and the John Passion and all this sort of thing, and he'd have semi-amateur professional orchestras, and we would play at these, you know, in the sections, and so we had that, you know, wonderful, you know, that repertoire as well, and this cathedral was packed for these things. So it was that was all part of our, so that was when we teamed up with the chorister for really the only times. And really then, I mean, then that following term, that third year I left, there was three of us, the big boys, 16, 17, all left at the same time. By then I would say that there were more youngsters coming in and more coming up, but that was my time there. Everyone was finding their feet, the teachers as well, the people, it was all new, everything was brand spanking new. And once I had gone, I think then the journey really started to take off after that. So. I was offered scholarships from the Royal College and the Royal Academy in London, but I didn't want to go. I wanted to get started, and when I was with the National Youth Orchestra down south, Trevor Williams, who was a co-leader of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, was tutoring, and he had done for years, and I knew him quite well. So I said to my father, I said, could I go down and speak to Trevor Williams about my future? And he knew he didn't know me, knew often of the NMIO. So I mean, my father, you know, respected the wishes of these people who, you know, who were advising him what I should do. And to my surprise, he said yes. So I went down, and anyway, to London and saw Trevor, and he said to me, John, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be an orchestral musician. Nothing about leading orchestra then. I mean, I used to go to concerts and look at leaders playing solos. You know, I thought, I could never do that. My God, I could never do that. So he said, right. He said, do you have any family in London? And I said, because I was staying there. I'd gone down for the weekend. I had a cousin that lived in London. And he said, right, well, a week on Monday, go back home, ask your parents if it's all right, come back down. He said, I've made a phone call to the BBC, the fixer, and you can start next week at the back of the Seconds BBC Symphony Orchestra at Maida Vale. So I went back home and I thought, oh my God, because my father's going to say no. I mean, you know, you have to go to college. But then, to cut a long story short, a few people were not very happy about this, but I spoke to my father this night, and he didn't say yes straight away, but the next day he said, you better phone Mr. Williams, as he called him, and thank him very much, and if that's what you want to do, that's what it was. So by the next week, I was down rehearsing at Maida Vale. It was the summer period coming up to the BBC prom concerts in Albert Hall. So that's where I started, at the back of the Seconds. And they had already rehearsed for the first concert coming up, so I went into this concert blind, as they say. I hadn't rehearsed any of the programme, and the second part of it was Elgar 1, and it was conducted by Adrian Bolt. Now, Adrian Bolt at this time was a very old man, and he was helped onto the podium. And I remember at 10 o'clock in the morning for the rehearsal, I hadn't played any of this. Looking through this and thinking about it, and he started, and 5 minutes later he said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, see you tonight. Well, you've never seen a boy go back to his digs so fast to look at this music. And you're like, my God, enough of all of it. So that night when we played it, you know, so that was in the deep end. But there's one, I can never remember, I think it's a Mozart symphony, it's very, very famous. But you see, when you're with a big symphony orchestra like that, if you're an extra, what happens is if they cut the orchestra down for Mozart, say they only want 3 decimals first, 2 decimals seconds, for the main players to get time off, extra players will move up and step in. So this happened in this case. So I was in the second desk of the second at the Albert Hall with the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And there's a very famous bit, which I know so well now, but I can't remember which symphony it is, but every violinist will know this, and it's called a sort of clang, I think. And it's something it's repeated first, but not the second time, but it's very easy when you come back to repeat it again, and you crash in and know because you've gone to the next one. It's a famous one, everyone knows it. Well, live on Radio 3 that night, guess who did it? And I crashed in it, and the whole promers went and of course you wouldn't know who it was. Oh no, the beacon red face was sort of sitting there. Well, I went back to my digs, and we were on again the next morning rehearsing for the next sort of concert. And I thought, well, this is it. You know, I'm going to, you know, no one said, not even the leader, and I kept myself to myself for a few days after that. No one said anything. Now, when I got into it, it's a very famous one. It's a famous one. I heard countless people do it through my career. I led orchestras, and I saw young people do it and sort of sit like that and look, and I thought, I've been there. But I was green. You know, wet behind the ears, and you know, but put in the deep end. I stayed for 2 years, though. I mean, I learned a lot of repertoire and things, and eventually, I left London and went to Manchester. Well, yes, I joined Scottish Chamber Orchestra. It was in the 80s. I wanted to come home. I wanted to come home to Scotland. I was in Manchester. I joined the BBC Northern, and there was my sister was in it, and she told me there was a principal violin job going. So I hadn't done an audition for an orchestra, so I did the audition, and they said, yes, we'd like you to join. We're going to Hong Kong in 6 weeks' time. I thought, oh my God, I'd love to go to Hong Kong. So I joined to go to Hong Kong, really. But I only stayed about a year and a half. I met lovely friends there, lovely colleagues. But the BBC strike came, and we all went on strike. And so I couldn't afford my flat anymore, because it went on for about 3 months. So I had to come back to Glasgow to my parents and give up my flat and picket outside BBC Scotland. I'd do my picket duty. We had to do it then. So I put my notice in. I said I'm going to stay in Scotland because I love Scotland. You can see my Scottish tie. I'm a very proud Scot. I'm proud to be from Scotland. So I came back and I left the BBC Northern and I came back and started freelance really. It was with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. I mostly freelance, and they had a co-leader job going, so I was invited to audition with John Doig was the leader, the founder leader of the orchestra, and they offered me the job then. But I had played with them for a few years before that. I mean, I knew them, so I accepted the job as associate leader. But unfortunately, I mean, John, he became very ill. He died far too young. And John Doig, the time I was there, I learned everything from John Doig. John Doig was one of these leaders that just did everything naturally. And you just watch John do everything and learn, and that's where I really learned everything. But because of his illness, I ended up leading obviously a lot, everything. I ended up leading everything. And people forget, leaders of orchestras, they don't just sit there and play. I mean, I would have bowings to do and music piled high at home, for next week, for the week after that, bowings to be done, and you'd have to bow all these parts. You have to bow the seconds, the violas, the cellos, then it'd have to be copied, and then you'd have the viola player coming back saying, this one doesn't matter, we'll do it this one, and then you'd have to do the next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. And the other thing I remember was, I always said, when I retire from playing, I would never wear a watch again, and I don't. I've never worn a watch since the day I stopped playing, because you would go in and stand up, take the A for rehearsal, say at 10 o'clock, and someone would say, it's only 2 minutes. And I said, just check your watch, let's sit down again. And then the next day someone would say, no, it's 2 minutes too early to sit down. And I always said, when I stop playing, I'm never going to wear a watch again, so I haven't. So, but anyway, being a leader is more, about just leading an orchestra and, whatever. And you have to be on top of your game, because it's like, the joke is, how many leaders does it take to change a light bulb? 10, 1 to do the job, and 9 others to stand around saying, I could do that better. So you've always been on top of your game. The Scottish Chamber, obviously we did the Edinburgh Festival, our normal concerts during the season, then the festival, Usher Hall, all the rest of it. But I'm sure they do it now still. During the summer months, when the opera and ballet companies come from abroad, like San Francisco Ballet and Paris Opera and things, well, the Scottish Chamber also would go into the pit and play for these companies, because they couldn't afford to bring their orchestras as well. So we'd do a lot of those, but we'd be doing concerts as well. And there was one instance which was very exciting, but logistically it was a nightmare, because we were playing. It was the old Playhouse Theatre and we were playing a ballet, I think it was, and it didn't finish till something like 10:20. We were to get to the Ross Bandstand because it was the last night and to do the firework concert. So it was a logistical nightmare. But what they did on the night, it was very, very exciting. So we finished the end of the playhouse. Straight outside, there was a coach waiting with outriders, police outriders and police cars and things. But you've got to imagine Princess Street itself down in Princess Street with thousands of people waiting for the fireworks. We had to get to the bandstand. So the outriders would go to the lights and stop all the traffic, and our coach would start speeding down and go round. And of course, with all the crowds waving, these people are very, very important. They are very important. And we went down Castle Wind, I think it was, or Castle Street, I think it was called. And it was very narrow, and there was roadworks on the right-hand side. And this outsider of this police motorcycle came in front of the bus, and with the cones all the way down the side, he kicked as he went down on his motorbike, and all people were cheering and round the bus. And we made it with about 5 minutes to spare to go onto the stage to do the firework concert. So that's how exciting it was, very exciting. We played ballet. I remember doing the Polish ballet. It was old Playhouse Theatre. The Edinburgh Festival Theatre hadn't been opened yet. And I'm always going about practicing. I always practice before every single, it doesn't matter what we were doing. I'd be practicing 5 minutes before I went on, always practicing. So I think we were doing Swan Lake, one of the big Tchaikovsky ballets, and they have big violin solos, very exposed. So about half an hour beforehand, there were lots of little rooms at the back of the playhouse, and you'd hear singers, warming up, and there'd be pianos in every room. So I had this room, and I was practicing away. And next door, there's someone on the piano trying to Beatles songs or something badly, and sort of, this. And I thought, God almighty. I went next door, and there's this chap with a beanie or something, and a hoodie or something, playing this, and I said, excuse me, and he said, oh, so I said, I'm trying to practice next door, I'm due on 5 minutes. He said, oh, sorry. So I said, God, went back to there, back. And then did the performance, lovely Polish conductor. He said, John, there's a reception afterwards for the sponsors, lovely, the Midland Hotel or some North British hotel. Come with me, it'll be nice. I said, yes, okay, I'll come, yes, that'll be nice. Went in, and there was champagne reception, all this. He introduced me to all these Polish important sponsors and things, which is all part of it. And I enjoyed that part though. And then he said to me, but I want you to meet someone very special. And he took me by the hand, and as we were going through, I saw him. It was this, he didn't have the beanie on, but he had the hoodie. And the Polish conductor took me up and said, I'd like to, this is John Doig, it's Rudolf Nureyev. And I thought, we have met, we have already met. And I must admit, he smiled, and he was fine. He was fine. He did apologise. Yeah, I know what it's like. In fact, he came back a year later with Paris Opera, and I saw him. I saw him across the room and about something else, and he waved. And I said, he always says, that's the man who's told me. One or two come to mind of sort of light-hearted stories. One of them was George Malcolm was a very fine musician, and he was more a harpsichord organist, but he did a lot of concerts, baroque concerts with a harpsichord and the orchestra around. He actually, I think for 10 years he was at Westminster Cathedral in London. He was a devout Catholic, and he was the organist there. But tremendous, very famous, and lots of recordings. But anyway, George came in to do these concerts. And there was this particular one, I think Handel, it was. And anyway, we started just, he was playing his harpsichord, and that's fine. And we come to the development section, and came to that, and he stopped. And he said, cellos and basses, what you marked there? And he said, piano. Make it pianissimo. Right, so that's fine. And then came to the second day, rehearsals, came to this piece, Handel piece, and then started off, and George was quite happy. Very elegant man, you know, very knowledgeable. Came to the development part, same part. But stop that. Well, what do you mark there? And he said, well, you said piano. He said, it's far too loud, mark it pianissimo. Started again, that was fine. So it came to the afternoon of the concert, and by this time, the cellos and everyone were all waiting for this bit. So it comes to the rehearsal, and he's playing away, comes to the development part, and all. What do you mark there? You've told you to mark pianissimo, P. Far too loud, far too loud. So that was fine, so the concert. And George was on, he's a very elegant man, very high collar, and his tails and sitting, and starts the concert. And that's right. We come to this handle, start the handle, everyone's waiting for this bit now. They're hardly playing, We come to development. Oh, shut up! I continued on. Now what the audience saw was, I don't know, but he said, shut up. So that was very fun. But composer-conductors are different. A different breed altogether, but James Macmillan's a fine composer, a fine conductor, the composer. And I think the reason being is they know every instrument. I mean, they write for every instrument, they know it back to front. But I don't just mean their own, I mean contemporary work, classical music, they're very fine. Michael Tippett was a good conductor. He was at one, I mean, the show Humility, he was at one rehearsal for the second symphony, and we started it and got halfway through, and you could see him doing this, and we were all a bit, and he eventually said, stop. He said, I'm lost, I'm totally lost. He said, and I wrote it. So it just shows the humility of these people. But Sir Peter Maxwell Davies was another very good conductor. In fact, he specialised more in Mozart, Beethoven, and we had, I did a lot of touring with Max, a lot of recordings, a lot of work with Max. But we were doing an American tour, and for 5 weeks we had played at the Albert Hall. He had made his conducting debut at the Proms at Albert Hall about a week before, and we were then going on tour to America for about 5 weeks. It was a long time, and we went to Carnegie Hall. We played, of course. You know, of course, the old gag is a musician in the street saying to the man, "Excuse me, could you tell me how I get to Carnegie Hall?" He says, "Practice, practice." So, you know, we went round America and Canada as well, and we were in Los Angeles, I remember, and we had played a concert there, and Max and myself had been invited to a very swanky party, very swanky after the concert, and we were picked up. A car was sent for him, so I went in his car, and we went to, we saw the Hollywood sign, and so we went to Beverly Hills to these mansions, fantastic mansions, and we turned into this great driveway, and it was just turning dusk, and there were the torches all the way up, all lit up, and it was wonderful. So we went up there, and this massive house, and the swimming pool, and all then underneath a huge canopy, all these tables around. And I was to go at this one, Max was over at that one, and so there was two seats here empty, but I'd say about 8 here, and then Max and then maybe 2 others. And they all hadn't been to the concert, but I take it was something, these 2 near me had been to the concert, but the others hadn't, so I'm not quite sure what this all was in the days of. Anyway, cut a long story short, I chatted to these which were at the concert. They were asking all about the orchestra and things like that. Eventually this man came to sit here, and a very elegant, very beautifully dressed woman sat beside him. But all the noise going on, there was a jazz band playing as well, and they introduced themselves. I couldn't hear, you couldn't really hear all the way straight, but they knew the people next to them, so they started talking that way, and I went back talking this way. Then that was fine. So it came time to leave, and I saw Max there, and I said, listen, I'm going to have to go because I'm going to lift back. Well, that's all very nice to meet you. Thank you. So we're going back again in the car, and Max said to me, he said, I noticed a man and woman came in halfway through to your table. And I said, yes. He said, I didn't catch their name. I said, I couldn't hear. And he said, do you know who it was? I said, I have no idea who it was. He said, Yasha Heifetz's son. I said, what? He did. I said, well, I didn't speak to him because he said it's just as well because he hates people asking about his father, obviously, because that's all they ask about. I believe now he's a very fine photographer. He was a photographer, his son. So it just shows you, you just don't know who you're going to be sitting beside on a Scottish Chamber Orchestra tour. But just talking about Max quickly, he did another tour about 10 years later, not with SEO, with the BBC Philharmonic, and they visited Las Vegas, and there was a journalist had booked a time call for the hotel to interview Max, from London. So the journalist phoned up and said, yes, could you put me through to Sir Peter Maxwell Davis's room? So they looked up and they said, no, I can't see anyone. Could you try under Sir Maxwell Davis? No, it's not. Could you try Peter Maxwell? No. So eventually he comes back and said, I have it here for you, sir. He said, it's on Mavis. So Max heard this. Again, humility of these great musicians. Max heard about this and thought this was all very funny. Max wrote a piece when he got home called Mavis in Las Vegas, and it's about 15 minutes long and it's theme and variations, and it's a wonderful piece of music. It conjures up Las Vegas and the hotels, the bling and the Liberace Museum and everything, and that's the sort of person he was. Just to finish off conductors, Scottish conductors I must mention, well, Gary Walker is today's, he's a St Mary's man, I think. He's a fine conductor. Roderick Bryden was he was the first principal conductor of the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, Roderick Bryden, and Roderick Bryden went to the choir school of St Mary's. He was a pupil there. And I remember Isabel Gray, when I was a pupil there, showing me a book, and in pencil on the inside said Roderick Bryden. Well, by this time Roderick Bryden was quite well known. He was conductor of the SEO, so I have to mention James Laughlin. James Laughlin conducted the very first concert that the SEO gave when they first started. And the interesting thing about Jimmy Laughlin, we did a tour when I was with the SCO. We did a lovely tour of France with Jimmy Laughlin. His wife came as well. We had lovely dinners afterwards. And I said we're having dinner one night after the concert, and I said to Jimmy, Jimmy conducted last night of the Proms. He was principal conductor of the Halley. He was very famous. Conducted last night with Proms about 4 or 5 consecutive years. The promenaders loved him. He's a big star then. And I said to Jimmy, I said, do you know, I played two of your last night at the proms, and Jimmy said, when? And I said, I was 17 when I played your first one. He said, well, I said, I was. So anyway, after the tour, I was having dinner with him at his house in Glasgow, and Jimmy said, what year was it that you played? So we worked out what year it was. Well, Jimmy had all the tapes from the BBC of all last night at the prom. So we took this one out and put it on. And there's Jimmy conductor last night at the front, and there I am, right at the back, right at the back. I could just see this, and Jimmy said, isn't that amazing? It's just so amazing, so it all comes round again. And of course, the last one I have to mention is Alexander Gibson, because I mean, in his time, I mean, he was the patron saint of music. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, he created so much work. Founding Scottish Opera, we did this SNO for 25 years. Freelance musicians, you know, the offstage bands for opera, you know, all that, so ad hoc bands for this, that and the other. And he agreed to be president of my Scottish Bach consort. I founded this group of players based in Killearn here, just up at the Kirk, so it's marvellous acoustics, but I formed it basically to give young musicians a stage to play. Every concert we played, I would have young musicians as soloists. Some from St Mary's were soloists as well, I remember some years back, but also to play in the group. Some of them would play, some would be soloists, and so we used to play about 10 concerts a year, all around rural Scotland. But Alex, he agreed to be the president of it. In fact, we're going to do a concert for his 70th birthday, and unfortunately he died when he was 69. But we went, this concert had all been arranged, and it went ahead as a celebration, and his wife, Vi came with the whole family, and it was a lovely occasion, but he was much involved with that. But Conrad Wilson wrote Alex Gibson's biography, and Conrad phoned me up to ask for a quote, you know, about leading orchestras and about Alexander Gibson. So I gave a quote. It was all, mostly he was a great conductor, don't get me wrong, he was a marvellous musician. But he was famous for having, you know, this wavery beat, and I said so in the book. But Alex being such a humility again. After a performance, he came up to me after the book had come out, and he said to me, "Thank you very much for what you said." You know, so he took it all on board. But because of it, I mean, sometimes you'd be at a rehearsal, and Alex would go, "Would someone play something?" And then there was an old wag, of course, and Alex knew this story. I mean, he knew it. He knew this story. But there was an old wag who said, when Alex was knighted, he said to him, "Now, Alex, you'll be asked to kneel on the stool, and the Queen will bring the sword down onto your left shoulder." That's a downbeat, you know. So, but Alex knew that story. He knew that story. But when I was with Scottish Opera, it was his swan song, I suppose, and he would come in and conduct his favourite La Boheme. And after one of them at the hotel, I came into the hotel and he was sitting talking to someone, and he was just about to go up the stairs, and I met him, and he said, "Oh, let's have another one in the bar," because he loved Lafroig, that was his tipple. So he obviously was in the mood just to sit for a bit. So we had few drinks and things, and he sat and you know, talking about his past and that was so interesting, because I love history. But I mean, to sit in you know, the company of these sort of people and listen to what their life, what they went through, was a privilege, really. I've always said to young musicians, it's three things: three things you have to do. The first is practice, practice, practice. I think it was Pablo Casals he lived to be about 96, and he practiced every day in his 90s. And one of his friends said to him, "Pablo, why are you still practicing every day?" He said, "I feel as if I'm getting that slightly better all the time." You know, so I mean, even he said it. Second thing is humour. Humour, to get through a profession like the music profession, is humour. Don't take it so seriously. Third thing, blinkers off. And what I mean by that is at least 2 weeks a year, if not a month. Take the blinkers off, put the instrument in the case, and get out into the world and see the world, meet other people, other things go on in this world. You'll soon be back putting blinkers on, taking your fiddle out or your instrument, whatever it is. So that's my three things I always say to young musicians. We practiced every day. I mean, we had to, when I started with Elsa Homer when I was very young, she sent you home with a report, and my mother would have to write in on all the days of how often you practice every day. So it would be an hour and a half, hour and a half, an hour and a half. And then at the end of it, of your lesson, she would write a report. And of course, you know, you think you've been clever when you're young. You know, when it was said, very good, excellent, you dance in to show your father, and of course when it wasn't so good, you slink off to your bedroom and you'll never notice it. Say, "Where's your report?" You know. So every day of my life when I was being brought up, I practiced. But I got so good at it though, that because we're in a tenement high up, my friends that I played with would be downstairs. And I was so good at learning my studies that my father was passing the door and things, he would hear me playing. But I got so good at it, I would have a copy of the Dandy on the music stand. I could read a comic, play the studies from heart, from memory, and look out the window, trying to get my friend to come up to ring the bell to ask me I go out to play. That's how good I was at practicing. I don't mind talking about it, but I certainly don't go into any detail now because it's just a way of life for me now, you know. But the first signs, funny enough, it was with my own group, Scottish Bach Concert, and I had been before, just feeling very odd at times and very dizzy and all sorts of things. And I remember a concert we were doing up in Kildare actually, and the second half, talking about conducting, one of the few times I did it, there must have been a choir for the second half, and simply because it was easier for them to see, really, I would conduct rather than play from the desk. But I remember saying at the interval, "I don't feel very well. I don't know why. I feel like I'm going to pass out. Put a chair on and a stand. I'm going to direct it from the violin. We'll just have to see if there's that." So that was really the first sort of thing that was beginning to happen, that I couldn't really quite understand what was happening. Then things started taking a bit of a turn. I was going up the stairs one night and I got nearly to the top when suddenly everything went swimmingly, went round, 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 and I could feel myself falling. And I was going backwards, of course, and I knew there was going to be a bang, but it seemed to go on for ages and ages. Of course, it would be only about 3 seconds, but it seemed to go on for ages, and I kept thinking, just let the bang happen, and it did eventually, obviously, bang, bang, and I went downstairs. And then, but you see, after that, you think, "Oh God, well, I just tripped up." It's like Jeremy Paxman recently has just said he's got Parkinson's disease, and he always said, you know, that it was the dog pulling him over. But of course, he knows that it wasn't it. But you make up, of course you do, because you think, well, it must be me, because, you know, there's something wrong with me. But anyway, this happened a few times, but eventually I had a small stroke, down my left-hand side. There's still sort of bit evidence of it, although it's much better now. But I was taken into hospital for that, and the doctor said there's a lot going on. There's an awful lot going on here. But it was the nurse, funny enough, that said to me, said, "Have you seen your back and your legs?" And said, so she got a mirror, you know, and showed in another mirror, as it were, and showed all black and blue all the way down. So she said, "What's been happening?" So I told her, and she, thankfully, she went off, and then neurologist came back and had a word with that. So they did tests and scans, and it showed that 50%, by then 50% of my dopamine cells had died, gone. And I didn't have a tremor then. I didn't really have anything. It was just this terrible dizziness and sort of, you know, balance problems. And so, neurologist, I said to him, I said, you know, that means I'm a violinist. I'm not even, he said, it's going to get worse, yes, it's going to get worse. So that was really how I sort of found out, but it's called the substantia nigra, I know the name of it at the back. And it's the cells, the dopamine cells they send messages to all your brain to do all sorts of things. It affects people in different ways. Now, I mean, I have nothing. I mean, for the last 5 years, I think there's nothing now, you know, because they don't reproduce anymore. So I've no balance. So I've got to have something to hold on to. And people sort of, well, I take medication now every 3 hours, and it just settles everything, you know. I mean, it's very finely tuned for everyone. I ended up in Forth Valley for a week in a locked ward because a neurologist won't mind me saying this, because he did admit he'd given me just a bit too much, and I'd gone a bit, you know. So they had to take me in and readjust and bring me back here. So the medication is very, very, very important. But people say to me, you know, because I walk with a stoop really, and they say, "Have you got a sore back as well?" And I said, "No." I said, "I walk like that because I have to hold on to it. I've literally no balance, so I have to hold on to it. If now and again, if I'm busy talking to someone and I miss whatever I'm on, I go down. So I keep as near the ground as I can. And I can assure you, I have fallen quite a few times, but it's only my pride that's hurt, but nothing more." But then what happened, what got me through it was I got a phone call near the beginning of it all, you know, from the neurologist had found out what it was, from Peter Maxwell Davis. And he phoned me and he asked me about it and everything. He said, "Right, what I want you to do is write me a letter every month. I want you to write me a letter every month. Tell me what you're doing and I'll reply." And I said, "Right, all right." So this went on for, you know, about 6 months, and then he would write back, and he did write back every month. And it went on for about a year and a half, and you know, when I look back now, it was sort of therapy. I didn't know how he knew how to do this, but I've still got all the correspondence up there. But so he would write back, say, "What a splendid letter. Now, you see, you're getting stronger and your handwriting's much easier," and he would talk about it. And then I got this lovely letter one day from Buckingham Palace, and I was to go to presentations at Holyrood Palace. It was a lovely experience, but this is what brings me back by Holyrood Palace important, because that's when my sort of officially my musical journey ended, but it began in that same stateroom as it began at the gala concert at St Mary's. Beautifully bookended, which was quite amazing. So I phoned Max after Holyrood Palace because he to thank him. So it was a very nice thing to receive, but he said, well, I thought it would cheer you up, and he also said, well, I'm so glad you met the Queen, because, you know, I'm very fond of her. And I thought, what an interesting thing to say. You have to remember that with Peter Maxwell Davies, when he was appointed Master of the Queen's Music, there was a few raised eyebrows, because in the 60s, 70s, he was the enfant terrible of the composer's world. I mean, his Fires of London, his group, and his 8 Songs for a Mad King, and all this, you know, and very outspoken he was. I wouldn't say he was anti-establishment, but I mean, he was very vocal for civil rights, and he went on marches and everything. So it was a lovely thing in a sense to say, you know, because they obviously had a great rapport together. I mean, the Queen obviously thought, you know, very, very highly of him, you know. So I got a call 8 months before he died. I got a call from him. He says, John, I want to see you. Can you come to London? And I said, well, I think yes. I think I can. Someone can help me on a plane. I'll get a train into London. And so I went down. He was teaching at the academy a couple of days a week. He was still teaching, and we stayed at the academy flat. So I stayed overnight with him. We went to dinner, and we sat up into the small hours reminiscing, and it was lovely. It was lovely. So, and then I came home the next day. And then, I mean, I phoned him after that, but it was, I think it was about 6 months to 8 months. I was doing something here, and the radio came on, and it was announced he had died. And the light suddenly went out of my life. He was a great musician. He was obviously, he was a great musician, but he was a great human being. He was a great human being, and I owe him an enormous debt of gratitude, and that's why I'm here just now talking to you, and mentally I am fine, I'm fine. I mean, I think as far as, let's say, St Mary's is concerned, I think where they've moved on enormously from when, you know, my very early days, as I say, they were taking baby steps then, for heaven's sake, you know, they're only starting off. I mean, what they benefit marvellously from is all these, I know, I follow online, and they have these wonderful international musicians come and talk, not only, you know, master classes, but they talk to them. They sit in the same rooms as them. That's the important part. That's it. I don't mean to normalise it, because there is a magic, and there should be a little bit of magic, you know, about the profession and these people and that. But, you know, it's the contact with, you know, great musicians that is so important. As I say, not just one's teacher, but then when you get into groups, ensembles and things, then you're getting different people coming in. Like you're maybe getting a composer coming in talking about the piece you're playing, or you're maybe getting, you know, a chamber music specialist coming in who's not, or a pianist coming in for a piano quintet. But you see, St Mary's now, of what I see, is it's a totally different place, and obviously when I was there, I mean, it's developed into this, you know, sort of powerhouse, real, you know, of young musicians, of giving up all their needs are catered for, you know. I mean, I can hardly believe it, 50 years next year when I walked into Old Coates House. Now, everything's encompassed. They've learned from the baby steps, they've learned now to encompass the whole thing and the needs and nurture of that young person. And they couldn't be in safer hands. And I really do hope they succeed in going to, you know, getting the old high school, you know, because that would be marvellous, because they need the space. I think of St Mary's as as a specimen plant, you know, a tropical beautiful plant that's got all these shoots coming off it, you know, and it's always, you know, improving. And it's breaking through its greenhouse now. What St Mary's Music School needs is a huge crystal palace, huge. And, you know, to have a place like that in the middle of a festival city, you know, to have the specialist music school, a powerhouse of young musicians, you know, nothing could be better, nothing. But in the past few years, personally, I mean, as you can see, I might have trouble with mobility and falling over and things, but there's no trouble with this. So I've been trying to help as much as I can with two things: help musicians and Parkinson's Scotland. Really, help musicians is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful organisation, and I ask anyone to go onto their website. They don't just, it's not just classical musicians, pop musicians, folk musicians, any musicians, but they help young musicians in their careers. They help musicians in distress, they help musicians with illness, they help retired musicians. And I would ask the pupils at St Mary's Music School, when they go into the profession, when they come out of school into profession, now I know from St Mary's Music School they go into many different professions, not just music, which is a good thing, it's a great thing. So, but I would ask them to carry the flag as well for help musicians. It is very important that, if I could also, once this pandemic is over, this awful time, if we ever get back to any sort of normality, once everything's functioning again, I would also make a plea to professional musicians, once you're earning again, is to put at least 1%, 2% of your annual income to help musicians. You must do this. This organisation, because of the pandemic, they have helped countless of freelance musicians. And I would urge everyone to really, every professional musician in the country, to give that serious thought. It would be a marvellous thing to do that. And if you've got any money left over, Parkinson Scotland could do with some as well. So. I'd really like as well to really just give my best wishes to past, present and future pupils of the school, and to the staff, of course, and the supporters of St Mary's. But for me personally, St Mary's is very, very close to my heart. St Mary's launched me into my musical career, and I would like just to say personally, St Mary's Music School, thank you very much.